November 14th, 2025. 2:17 local time. Central Ukraine. A modified commercial drone lifts off from a field that will be abandoned within the hour. No runway, no tower, no lights. Just 3 operators crouched behind a cargo van, watching telemetry on a ruggedized laptop. The drone climbs to 40 meters, holds, then pitches forward and disappears into the darkness, following a flight path that was programmed 6 hours earlier using satellite imagery, intercepted radio frequencies, and intelligence sourced from behind Russian lines. Its target is an ammunition depot, 430 kilometers inside Russian territory. Modern air defense networks are not supposed to miss a drone flying at 120 kilometers per hour. Russian S-400 systems can track a ballistic missile at Mach 15. Pantsir units are specifically designed to engage low-altitude threats. The electronic warfare umbrella across western Russia includes Krasuka-4 jammers capable of disrupting GPS guidance across a 60-kilometer radius. And yet, this drone will reach its target. Because the people who planned this mission have spent 4 months mapping every gap, every blind spot, every predictable rotation in Russian radar coverage. They have cataloged reaction times down to the second. They know when operators change shifts. They know which frequencies get jammed and which ones stay clean. They call themselves Phantom. I'm your host at Navy Battlefront, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing the story of one of the most secretive drone units in the Ukrainian war, a GUR military intelligence cell that has been responsible for some of the most devastating strikes against Russian military infrastructure since late 2025. This is not a story about a single mission. It is a story about how a small team of former software engineers turned the Russian air defense network into a problem to be solved, and then solved it, one flight at a time. To understand Phantom, you need to understand what was happening in Ukraine's drone war by mid-2025. The landscape had changed dramatically. Russia had invested billions in layered air defense. The western approaches to Moscow were covered by overlapping S-400 batteries at Bryansk, Kursk, and Voronezh. Each battery provided a detection envelope of roughly 400 kilometers. Behind those, shorter-range Buk M3 and Tor M2 systems created a second layer designed specifically for low-altitude intercepts. Ukrainian drone strikes were still happening, but attrition rates were climbing. In July 2025, Ukrainian military sources acknowledged that nearly 60% of long-range drones launched toward Russian rear areas were being intercepted or disabled by electronic warfare before reaching their targets. The cost calculus was still favorable. A Ukrainian drone costing $8,000 forcing a Russian interceptor missile worth $200,000. But mission success rates were falling. GUR intelligence recognized the problem was not hardware. Ukraine had drones. Volunteers were building them in garages. Factories were producing airframes by the thousands. The problem was planning. Each mission was being planned in relative isolation. A unit would launch, succeed, or fail, and the data from that flight would rarely make it to the next planning cycle in a systematic way. What if every flight, successful or not, became a data point in a continuously updating map of Russian air defenses? That was the idea behind Phantom. Recruitment began in August 2025. GUR officers approached former IT professionals, software engineers, and data analysts who had enlisted or volunteered since the full-scale invasion. The criteria were specific: programming ability, experience with autonomous systems or flight control firmware, and a tolerance for operating in small, isolated teams under extreme secrecy. 14 people were selected. The unit commander was a 31-year-old former software developer from Kharkiv who had been working on commercial drone delivery systems before the war. His background was in autonomous navigation, programming drones to follow complex waypoints without GPS reliance. According to sources familiar with the unit's formation, he described the Russian air defense network to his recruits in terms they understood. It is a distributed system with latency, error rates, and exploitable logic. Their job was to debug it. By September 2025, Phantom was operational. They were given access to something no previous drone unit had possessed: a consolidated intelligence feed combining satellite imagery from multiple sources, signals intelligence from Ukrainian electronic surveillance units, and human intelligence reports from GUR agents operating inside Russia. The first mission launched on September 28, 2025. Target: a fuel storage facility near Oriel, approximately 360 kilometers from the launch point. The drone carried a modified warhead weighing 18 kilograms. It was intercepted. A Pantsir S-1 unit, stationed 12 kilometers south of the target, engaged the drone at an altitude of 70 meters. Flight time before intercept: 2 hours and 41 minutes. A failure. Except Phantom did not treat it as one. The drone's telemetry had been transmitting throughout the flight via a low-bandwidth encrypted link. The operators knew the exact coordinates where the Pantsir engaged. They knew the altitude. They knew the time. Cross-referencing with signals intelligence, they identified the specific radar frequency the Pantsir used for tracking. This data went into what the unit called the Atlas, a shared database that would eventually contain thousands of entries mapping Russian air defense behavior across western and central Russia. The second mission launched 4 days later. Same target, different route. The flight path had been reprogrammed to pass 11 kilometers north of the Pantsir position identified during Mission 1, exploiting a terrain depression that reduced the drone's radar cross-section below the system's engagement threshold. The fuel depot burned for 9 hours. This was the methodology. Every mission fed the Atlas. Every failure was an investment. Every success confirmed a gap that could be exploited again, until Russia moved the asset or changed the pattern, at which point the new configuration became the next data point. By November 2025, the Atlas contained verified positions for 47 Russian air defense assets across 5 oblasts. It cataloged radar activation patterns, showing that certain S-400 batteries operated on predictable rotation schedules, going into standby mode during shift changes that lasted between 8 and 14 minutes. It mapped electronic warfare coverage, identifying corridors where Krasuka 4 jamming was weakest due to terrain masking or power limitations. Phantom's mission success rate climbed from roughly 40% in September to over 70% by late November. The unit was launching an average of 3 missions per week from locations that never repeated. The operational security was extreme. Operators traveled in civilian vehicles. Launch sites were selected from a rotating list of pre-scouted positions: agricultural fields, forest clearings, abandoned industrial zones. Each site was used once and then permanently removed from the list. Equipment was transported in components that, individually, looked like standard commercial electronics. Communication was minimal. The unit operated in cells of 3 to 4 people. A cell would receive mission parameters via encrypted channels, plan the route using Atlas data, execute the launch, and then relocate within 60 minutes. If a cell was compromised, it had no knowledge of other cells' positions or upcoming targets. December 7th, 2025. This is where the story shifts. GUR tasked Phantom with its most ambitious target yet: the Diagalevo Air Base near Ryazan, roughly 380 kilometers from the nearest feasible launch position. Diagalevo was home to 2 95 MS strategic bombers, the aircraft that had been launching cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities since the early months of the war. The challenge was not just distance. Diagalevo sat inside one of the most heavily defended corridors in Russia. 3 S-400 batteries provided overlapping coverage. 2 Pantsir units were stationed on the airfield perimeter. electronic warfare assets blanketed the approach from the west. The Atlas had data on all of these, but the data revealed a problem. There was no clean corridor. Every viable approach passed within the engagement envelope of at least one system. The unit commander proposed something that had not been attempted before: a coordinated multi-drone launch designed to force Russian air defenses into a sequence of reactions that would create a temporary gap. The concept was based on a principle borrowed from network penetration testing. If you cannot find a vulnerability in a system, you create one by overloading a specific node. 3 drones would launch from 3 separate positions within a 40-minute window. The first 2 were designated as probes. They carried minimal payloads and were programmed to fly routes that would deliberately trigger specific air defense assets: the Pantsir units on the southern perimeter and the S-400 battery east of Ryazan. The third drone carried the strike payload. Its route was calculated to pass through the coverage gap that would exist for approximately 6 to 9 minutes, while the triggered systems were engaged with the first 2 drones and cycling through their engagement sequences. December 8th, 1:04. The first drone launched from a position south of Tula Oblast, 1:22. The second drone launched from a point further west, 1:38. The strike drone launched. Telemetry from the first probe showed it was detected at 1:47. The Pantsir unit on the southern perimeter activated its tracking radar. At 1:51, the probe was engaged and destroyed at an altitude of 55 meters. The second probe was detected at 1:58 by the S-400 battery's surveillance radar. The battery transitioned from search to track mode. At 2:03, a 48N6 missile launched. The probe was destroyed at 2:04. The strike drone was now inside the corridor. The Pantsir that had engaged the first probe was in its reload cycle, a process that Atlas data indicated took between 4 and 7 minutes, depending on crew proficiency. The S-400 battery's fire control radar was still oriented eastward, tracking the debris signature of the second probe. At 2:09, the strike drone crossed the airfield perimeter at an altitude of 12 meters, below the minimum engagement elevation of the Pantsir system. The drone impacted a hardened aircraft shelter housing a Tu-95 MS bomber. The 18-kilogram warhead detonated against the shelter's blast door. Satellite imagery reviewed within 48 hours showed significant damage to the shelter and scorch marks consistent with secondary fires from aviation fuel or munitions stored nearby. 1 Tu-95 MS was assessed as damaged beyond immediate repair. Phantom had struck a strategic bomber base deep inside Russia using a coordinated drone attack that cost less than $30,000 in total hardware. The success at Diagalevo changed how GUR viewed Phantom's capabilities, but it also introduced a complication that the unit had not anticipated. Russia noticed the pattern. Intercepted communications analyzed by Ukrainian signals intelligence in the third week of December revealed that Russian Air Defense Command had begun studying the sequence of drone detections from the Diagalevo attack. They identified the probe and strike methodology. A directive was issued to regional air defense commanders. Any detection of multiple drone tracks within the same time window was to be treated as a coordinated attack, with all assets remaining in active scan mode, regardless of individual engagement status. Phantom's advantage was eroding. The Atlas data from December missions showed that Russian reaction times had decreased by an average of 23%. Systems that had previously gone into standby during shift changes were now maintaining partial readiness around the clock. The unit commander acknowledged the adaptation in an internal assessment obtained by sources familiar with the operation. "They are patching the bugs we found. We need to find new ones." January 2026 forced a methodological overhaul. The unit shifted from exploiting known gaps to actively probing for new vulnerabilities created by Russia's own countermeasures. The logic was counterintuitive. By forcing Russia to keep more systems active more of the time, the countermeasures themselves were creating new failure modes. Crews were fatiguing faster. Equipment was running longer hours with less maintenance. False alarms were increasing because systems set to higher sensitivity were triggering on birds, weather, and commercial air traffic. Phantom began launching decoy flights, drones carrying no warhead, programmed to fly erratic patterns at the edge of detection range. The purpose was not to strike, but to generate data. Each Russian response to a decoy revealed updated positions, reaction protocols, and frequency usage. By late January, the Atlas had been updated with a second-generation threat picture that accounted for Russia's December adaptations. New corridors were identified, many of them created by the very countermeasures Russia had implemented. February 3, 2026. Phantom launched its largest coordinated operation. 5 drones, 3 targets, 2 ammunition depots near Bryansk, and a radar installation supporting the S-400 battery that had been one of the primary obstacles to Western approach routes. The operation was planned over 11 days. Atlas data was cross-referenced with real-time signals intelligence provided by a GUR electronic surveillance team operating from a position in Sumy Oblast. Weather forecasts were factored in. The mission was timed to coincide with a low cloud ceiling that would degrade optical tracking systems. 2 of the 5 drones were intercepted. One experienced a guidance malfunction attributed to electronic warfare interference and crashed in an unpopulated area. The remaining 2 reached their targets. The first ammunition depot detonated in a series of secondary explosions that continued for over 4 hours. Satellite imagery showed a blast crater consistent with the detonation of stored artillery shells and rocket propellant. The radar installation was struck but only partially disabled. Post-mission analysis indicated the warhead had impacted a support structure rather than the primary antenna array, reducing the radar's capability, but not eliminating it. A 70% mission completion rate against hardened targets deep inside Russian territory. But not without cost. The guidance malfunction on the 3rd drone was traced to a new Russian electronic warfare system that had not been in the Atlas. Signals analysis suggested it was a variant of the Pol-21 GPS denial system, operating on a frequency band that Phantom's firmware wasn't programmed to counter. The unit's technical team spent 2 weeks reverse engineering the interference pattern from telemetry data. They developed a firmware patch that allowed their drones to switch to inertial navigation when specific jamming signatures were detected, maintaining course accuracy within approximately 50 meters over distances of up to 20 kilometers. This was the cycle. Strike, adapt, get countered, adapt again. Each iteration made both sides more sophisticated, but the asymmetry of cost remained in Ukraine's favor. Comment Phantom. If you think this approach to warfare is the future of asymmetric conflict. March 2026 brought new challenges. Russian forces deployed additional mobile air defense assets to western Russia. Tor-M2 systems on truck-mounted platforms that could relocate every few hours. Unlike fixed S-400 batteries, these mobile units were difficult to track and did not appear on the Atlas until they engaged a drone or were detected by overhead surveillance. Phantom's response was to increase the frequency of decoy missions, essentially forcing the mobile Tor units to reveal their positions by reacting to non-threatening targets. It was expensive in terms of drone airframes, but cheap compared to the intelligence gained. By mid-March, the Atlas contained position data on over 90 air defense assets, including estimated relocation patterns for 17 mobile systems. The database had grown from a simple spreadsheet into a structured platform with search functions, threat corridor calculations, and automated route planning suggestions based on the current threat picture. The unit's operators had also grown more skilled. The original 14 members had been supplemented by 6 additional recruits, all with backgrounds in software engineering or electronic systems. Training took place during operational downtime, with new members studying Atlas data and participating in mission planning before being assigned to active cells. March 22, 2026. The operation that would become Phantom's most consequential and most controversial. GUR intelligence identified a command node near Millerovo in Rostov Oblast. The facility was assessed as a coordination center for Russian drone operations targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Destroying it would not just eliminate a military target. It would disrupt the command chain responsible for strikes that had been hitting Ukrainian power stations throughout the winter. The target was 510 kilometers from the nearest viable launch position. This exceeded the range of Phantom's standard drone by approximately 80 kilometers. The technical team proposed a solution: a relay launch. The drone would be launched from a forward position in Kharkiv Oblast, fly to a predetermined waypoint where it would receive a course update via a low-frequency signal from a relay transmitter positioned in Sumy Oblast, and continue on an adjusted flight path to the target. It was technically feasible. It had never been tested operationally. The risk assessment was blunt. If the relay signal failed, the drone would continue on its original heading and miss the target by an estimated 40 kilometers, crashing somewhere in Rostov Oblast with identifiable Ukrainian drone components. If the relay transmitter in Sumy was detected by Russian electronic warfare, it could compromise the GUR team operating the equipment. The unit commander recommended proceeding. GUR Command approved. April 1, 2026, 23:14. Launch. The drone climbed to 60 meters and turned southeast. Flight conditions were favorable. Light winds, overcast sky, temperatures near freezing, which improved the drone's engine efficiency and extended its range margin. At 0:48, the drone reached the relay waypoint. The transmitter in Sumy sent a compressed burst lasting 0.4 seconds. The drone's firmware received the update, adjusted its heading by 3.7 degrees, and continued autonomously. The relay had worked, but the burst had been detected. Russian electronic warfare monitoring stations logged the transmission. Its location was triangulated to a position approximately 8 kilometers west of the Ukrainian-Russian border. Russian forces dispatched a response, details of which remain unclear, but Ukrainian sources indicated that the GUR relay team evacuated their position within 15 minutes of the transmission. The drone continued. At 2:31, it crossed into the detection envelope of a Buk M3 battery positioned northeast of Millerovo. The Atlas had this system catalogued, and the flight path was designed to pass through its minimum engagement altitude gap, the narrow band below 40 meters, where the Buk's guidance radar lost resolution against ground clutter. The drone descended to 28 meters. Terrain at this point was flat agricultural land with minimal obstacles. At 2:44, the drone reached the target coordinates. It climbed to 70 meters for terminal approach, the minimum altitude needed for the warhead's detonation fuse to arm properly. 2:45. Impact. Post-strike intelligence was limited. Cloud cover prevented immediate satellite assessment. Signals intelligence over the following 72 hours showed a significant disruption in communication patterns associated with the Millerovo facility. Russian drone operations targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure decreased measurably in the first 2 weeks of April, though analysts cautioned that other factors, including Ukrainian air defense improvements, may have contributed. The mission was assessed as a success, but the relay signal detection created a problem. Russian electronic warfare analysts now knew that Ukrainian drone units were using relay communications to extend operational range. This intelligence would likely lead to countermeasures, monitoring for similar burst transmissions, deploying jamming assets to known relay corridors, potentially targeting relay teams directly. Phantom's commander acknowledged this in a briefing documented by sources with access to the unit's operational records. Every capability we reveal is a capability with an expiration date. The relay worked once. It might work twice. By the third time, they will be waiting. This is the fundamental tension in Phantom's war. Each successful innovation buys time, but also educates the adversary. The Atlas grows more detailed, but Russian defenses grow more responsive. The cost asymmetry favors Ukraine, but the adaptation cycle is accelerating. As of early April 2026, Phantom has conducted over 80 missions since September 2025. Confirmed strikes include ammunition depots, fuel storage facilities, radar installations, airfields, and at least one command node. The unit's estimated total hardware expenditure across all missions is under $400,000. The value of the Russian military assets damaged or destroyed is assessed in the hundreds of millions. Subscribe if you want to understand how modern asymmetric warfare is actually fought, not with billion-dollar platforms, but with laptop-planned missions launched from fields that are empty by dawn. But the numbers do not capture the full picture. 14 operators, now 20, working in rotating cells across central Ukraine, planning each mission over days, launching in darkness, relocating before sunrise. The psychological toll is not discussed in operational briefings, but it exists. These are former civilians who now calculate blast radiuses and radar blind spots as part of their daily routine. The Russian air defense network is not a static opponent. It learns, it adapts, it patches vulnerabilities and creates new ones. The Atlas is only as current as the last mission's data. By the time a corridor is validated, it may already be closing. Phantom's commander framed it in terms familiar from his previous career. In software, you ship a patch and the bug is fixed. In this war, every patch they ship creates 2 new bugs, and every patch we ship does the same for them. The question is who finds the bugs faster. The question has no permanent answer. It resets with every mission. The relay technique used on the Millerovo strike has already been flagged as potentially compromised. Russian electronic monitoring has increased in the border regions of Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts. GUR's relay team has not been redeployed since the April 1st mission. There is also the diplomatic dimension. Strikes deep inside Russian territory using autonomous drones raise questions that extend beyond the battlefield. The drones fly pre-programmed routes. Once launched, human control is limited. If a guidance error sends a drone into a civilian area, the operator who launched it may be hundreds of kilometers away with no ability to intervene. Phantom's protocols include target verification procedures and route planning that avoids populated areas. But no autonomous system is infallible. And as mission ranges increase, the margin for navigational error grows with them. One conclusion is clear. A small unit of former software engineers, operating with commercial-grade hardware and a shared database, has demonstrated that the most expensive air defense systems in the Russian inventory can be systematically mapped, tested, and defeated, not through technological superiority, but through methodical data collection and iterative exploitation of a complex system's inherent imperfections. One consequence remains unresolved. Russia's adaptation to Phantom's tactics has forced changes across its entire Western air defense architecture. More mobile assets, longer active scan periods, increased electronic warfare deployment. These changes improve coverage, but introduce new strain on equipment and personnel. Whether this improves Russian air defense effectiveness or simply reshuffles its vulnerabilities is a question that will be answered by the next round of missions. One risk persists. The relay technique, autonomous navigation over extended ranges, and the increasing sophistication of coordinated multi-drone operations are pushing the boundaries of what small units can achieve deep inside enemy territory. Each escalation in capability brings Phantom closer to an operational failure that could expose not just the unit, but the intelligence networks that support it. The drones launch from fields that are empty by morning. The operators are already somewhere else. The Atlas updates with new data. and the next mission is already being planned. Somewhere in central Ukraine, a laptop screen glows in the dark, plotting a route through gaps that may or may not still exist.